Okay, good morning. So we have now the opportunity to be studying Sotah. We are starting with Daf Beis. So today we'll do Daf Beis Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. Hamekane le'ishtay, somebody who does kinui on his wife, somebody who warns his wife, as we'll see later on in the Gemara, and Rashi points out over here and in Sanhedrin, somebody is warning his wife, al tistri im ish plani, do not be cloistered, do not be secluded with X, with a certain person. So Belezer Eimer, Mekane La Pishnayim, Mashka Pied Echad. Belezer says that you do kinoi with two Adim. In other words, you have the regular requirement of having Adim, Reuben and Shimon, you bring them along, and they are standing next to you when you are warning your wife not to be cloistered, not to be closeted with a certain person. Umashka Pied Echad. And after she has already received kinui, after she's already been warned, and she nonetheless, as we will see, is going to be again closer with this person. So then she will be required to drink the Mesaita, even if one person, just Reuben, just one person, random person says that he saw that she was closeted with someone else. So according to Belezer, your mashke al pi echad al pi atzmai, but the original kinui has to be done with two edim. Rabbi Shua disagrees. Rabbi Shua aimer mekanel al pi shnayim, umashke al pi shnayim. According to Rabbi Shua, no. According to Rabbi Shua, yes, the initial kinui has to be done with two edim. The initial warning has to be done with two edim. But the drinking, umashke, is also required to be with two aidim. That's not sufficient to just do it with one aid. So again, Machlei Shablezer B'Shua, these are the two different positions, both agreeing that with regards to kinoi, it is mandated that you have to have two aidim, but with regards to stira, it is a machlekes between Rabbi B'Shua. According to Rabbi even stira al pi echad al pi asmei sufficient, and according to Rabbi Shua, it is insufficient. You need two Adim. Sufficient for what? When we're saying that it's sufficient, what do we mean when it's saying sufficient? Saying it's sufficient to be answering her up. We're not saying that she's going to be killed in any way. This is no evidence of anything that she has done. Remember, it's just talking here about stira, about being cloistered. What happened, we have no idea. That is not the intent of what the Mishnah is saying. The Mishnah is just saying that the Isser Shabbat that we're going to have is going to be that she's usher to her husband until she drinks the Mesaita. Not that in any way she's going to be punished. If she refuses to drink the Mesaita, then her husband will divorce her without a ksuba. But nothing else is going to happen. That she has absolute choice in terms of if she would like to drink the Mesaita or not. Continues the Mishnah. How does kine work? She is told in front of two people, do not speak with this person. And she in fact ends up speaking to this person again in the future. In other words, the stira is that she speaks to somebody. That's not real stira, because over here she's going to be entirely mutter to her husband, entirely mutter to Truma if she's married to a kain. There's no issue with that. In other words, the kinoi, as we're going to see, if you think about it as a diagram, they have four options. You could say al tadabri, don't speak to the person. Al tistrima, don't be close with the person. So if you say al tadabri, don't speak to the person, that's not considered a real kinoi. It has to be, as Rashi explains in the Gemara we'll see later on, it has to be that you say do not be close with the person. Merely saying don't talk is not real kinoi. So if you say al tisri, do not be close to, so that's a real kinoi. Now, you have two options as to what the next situation is going to be. Either she talks then to the person. If she talks then to the person, so if you say out to Dabri, that wasn't even a real kinoi. So if she talks to the person, and who cares? It's irrelevant. You never real kinoi, you never real sid. There's nothing here. What happens if you said al-tisri, which is a real kinoi, and then she's just talking? Again, there's nothing to see here. The only issue that comes up that we're going to say that she's required to actually drink the Mesaita is if you say Tistri Mishpan, you say do not be close with the person, and then she's actually close with the person. Right, so only one of those four things is going to actually work. So the Lashon of the Mishnah, later on in the Gemara, we're going to explain this. But from the Lashon of the Mishnah, which sounds like, oh, he's saying Amr al Tadabri Ish Plana, that's the real kinoi. That's not actually the real kinoi. The real kinoi is do not be associate yourself with this person. That's the only type of warning that is real. Anything else that is short of that is not considered kinoi. Finish the Mishnah. If she goes with this supposed paramour into a cloister place, and she remains there with that person, as Rashi says, that just means kedera. In other words, just the initial part of bia, but not the subsequent. So then, then she's going to be usher to her husband. She's going to be usher to Chuma if she's married to a kohen. Right? So she needs to have chalitza the same way she needs to have a get, but there will be no yibum. So again, the key part here is to remember, number one, that the stira, even though the lashon of the Mishnah is al tadabri, is going to come out of the Gemara that we mean al tistri. That's the only way to have a real kinoi. And the machlokes between Rabbi Shua and Rabbi Lezer is in relation not to the kinoi. The kinoi, they both agree that the only legitimate kinoi is when you say al tistri in front of two Adim. If you say al tistri in front of one Aid, or you say al tadabri, even in front of the 100 Adim, doesn't mean anything. So al tistri in front of two Adim, both contra Belezer and Beshua, is required. What about the actual stira? So if the actual stira is just dibor, is nothing. The only actual stira is if it's in a cloistered place, and then that stira again is going to be machlokes from Lezer Beshua contra Belezer. If he says that she was cloistering herself, or one aid says that's sufficient. Contra Beshua, it has to be two aidim. Cannot be himself, cannot be one aid. No, it has to be two aidim. Contra Beshua, as the bar is set higher to get the woman to mechayev to drink mesaita. Practically, what would that mean? That would mean that according to Lezer, the requirement for her to drink saita is therefore a lot easier to reach. That bar is a lot easier to reach. And so what that would then mean is that with regards to being asa now misafek, if she's Eishes Kain to eat truma, to be with her husband, all that stuff becomes much easier to answer up contra Blazer than it is according to Rabbi Shua. All right, so that's the basic Mishnah, and we'll now, now we'll go into the Gemara. Yeah, so we have in this Masech, we have the Taish Shantz. Normally, we think of the Taish Shantz most as a commentary just on the Mishnah. He also has a commentary on the Gemara, so we're very much zeichet to be able to look at his commentary. It helps to have another Rishon's commentary because there's not really much in terms of the way of other Rishonim, given the fact that there was a lot of Agadata in it and it wasn't a practical application to say it nowadays, even though it is brought down in Shulchan Aruch. We will get to all that. A relatively limited application, given that there's no Mesaita anymore, which we will talk about later on as well. So it's good to have some Rishonim. We have the Meiri, we have the Tais Shantz, but we don't have like a Rash, but Ritva. We don't have some of the basic Rishonim that we normally would access. The Tais Shant's basic approach to his commentary is to use Rashi as his letmio. Rashi is his basis, and then he goes off like a Tais, like you would expect, to ask his own things. We'll see a couple of things from him today as well. All right, so Zot the Gemara. Michti. All right, so let's see what we're talking about. Tana min Nazir Solik. We are just finished right before. We are not going in that order. We're doing our own order, but there's a Gemara. The Gemara says, "But ain't Seder Mishnah, ain't Seder Gemara." There is some Seder, but can't necessarily access what it is always. But we understand that Rabbi Yehuda Nasman prepared the Mishnah. He had a Seder in mind. So we just finished Saita. We just finished Nazir. Now we're starting Saita. Why are we starting? It says the Gemara Michti Tanim Nazir Salak. We just finished learning Sechas Nazir. My Tana the Katani Saita. Why are we just now turning into Saita? What's the basis of this? So the Gemara explains, Kid Rebbe. Oh, you want to know why we're going from Nazir to Saita? It's because of a line of Rebbe. What did Rebbe say? The Tanya Rabbi Eimer, Lama Nisbecha Pashas Nazil Pashas Sotah. We have a brisa. Rabbi said, why is it that Pashas Nazir and Pashas Sotah are samach together? You know how we had in Brachas, we had the Gemara told us there. Smuchim, if you're darshaning smuchim or you're not darshaning smuchim, the pasuk in Tehillim says that smuchim are from Hashem. So we use that to make a homiletical approach, which is that you can darshan from the Torah, where the Torah puts one parsha next to another parsha. There's a machlek tana if you can darshan that. Is that there to teach you something? So I want to say that even if you say that smuchim is not something that you can darshan, but in Kol Torah Kul, but in Sefer Devarim, maybe you should be able to darshan smuchim. Either way. But we're starting out here on the assumption, Rabbi is saying that there is something to learn from the smichas parashas of Nazir and Sotah, and it's a very famous line of Rabbi. The Tanya Rabbi Aimer Lam Nisbach Parashat Nazir Parashat Sotah Lam Lachashik Al Rei Sotah B'Kol Kula Yazer Atzmim and Ayayin. Anyone who sees a Sotah in her disgrace, as we're going to see later on in the Gemara, they uncover her hair, they uncover her shirt, they tie a rope. All these things that are there to be manavel her, essentially to make sure that she doesn't drink, right? They're all there to try to induce her to say, I sinned, and therefore to prevent her from drinking. Why do I want to prevent her from drinking? Well, it's not really to save her life so much as not to desecrate Hashem's name, to have to put the name of Hashem into the water and erase it. That is very much not ideal. And so we attempt as much as possible to say, look, just tell us that you don't want to drink. We're good to go. You don't have to drink. No one's forcing you. And it's the site is a woman who actually is saying, no, I want to. Right? Presumably either she knows she's innocent or that she doesn't believe in the efficacy of the Mesait or has some other reason to think that she's going to be able to be protected, all of which we will see later on. So at this stage, we have Rabbi, you open up Parshas Nasai, and you see there in Parshas Nasai that the Torah puts right next to the Parsha of Sotah, right after the Parsha of Sotah, the Parsha of Nazir. They literally come one from the other. So everybody says, why is it? We could dash in the smichas. Anybody who sees what's happening, the treatment of this Sotah is the Asman, they're going to take on, and the Naziris, they're going to take on removing themselves from wine. What would be the logic? What would be the thinking? The thinking is how did it happen that this woman got into this kind of a terrible situation? Most likely there was some spirits, there was some inebriation. So as a result of that, you are going to be able to protect yourself from getting into such difficult situations by not drinking. So says the Gemara, it's very interesting. But if you again look in Parshas Nasa, you'll see that Sotah is listed first, and then Nazir. So says the Gemara, okay. But listening Sotah, listening Nazir. So let's do it in the right order. First talk Sotah, then talk Nazir. Says the Gemara, I did Tana Ksubas, Vitana Amadir, because we learned in the beginning Mesechus Ksubas. And in Mesechus Ksubas, there's a parak there about the Nedarim, parak Amadir. So Tana Nedarim, that's why we want to talk about Mesechus Nedarim. The I did Tana Nedarim once, we were already discussing Nedarim, Tana Nazir, the Damila Nedarim. So then we decided let's discuss Nazir, which is comparable to Nedarim. Why? Because Nazir is a type of Neder. So now we have to explain why Sotah is coming after Nazir. If anything, it should be the reverse order. You're seeing what happened to the Sotah, you're making yourself into a Nazir. So how did it happen that we have Nazir before Sotah on that? The Gemara says because of the fact that we had Ksubis, which they opened the Nedarim. So we wanted to teach in the Nedarim. And then we have Nazir, which is a type of Neder, so that's why Nazir comes along. And that's why now we have Sotah, Tana Sotah, because the Rebbe, and then we put in Sotah after, like Rebbe said, because there is a juxtaposition, a closeness of smichos in the Parshas Nazir, where you see Nazir and Sotah connected. This is the opening part of the Gemara. Taisus very bothered here. The top Taisus asks, Tema of Habresh Mesechus Nazir. You open up Mesechus Nazir on Daf Beis. You open up literally the first line there, and the Gemara tells us. So, Amar Deloitanale Ela Agav Sotah Kederebi. Over there, we learn out that the whole reason for talking about Meseches Nazir is because of Sotah. So I don't understand. Over there, if you open up that Beis in Nazir, we say why we have Nazir. we say, oh, because of Rebbe's thing about the smichos. So if the whole idea of even talking about Nazir is just because of the smichos, then shouldn't say to be coming first. Says Taisvis, no. Listen, how did Nazir come into the rubric of Masechah Sotah? It came into the rubric of Masechah Sotah because of the fact, I'm sorry, Nazir came into the rubric of Seder Nashim because of Masechah, because of Sotah. Because of that smichas and Parshas Nasai between Sotah and the Parsha of Nazir. And once we have it already in sort of our tractate that we're studying, so then cover bas and Nadarim. So then we are going to teach it after Nadarim because it's comparable to Nadarim, so it jumps in first. So as it were, you have a two-part kind of a thinking that you have to resolve, right? One part is how does Nazir get into Seder Nashim? It has nothing to do with Nashim per se. Yes, and a woman could be a Nazir, sure. There's a lot of topics of women that's discussed in Nazir, sure. But what's the reason that Nazir would be in Seder Nashim specifically? Says Taisus, that's the first thing you had to answer. The first thing you had to answer was how it got into Nashim. It got into Nashim because there's a smichus with Sotah. Once you answer that it got into Nashim because of the smichus with Sotah, then it's sort of free to move around. And the reason that it's going to come first, even though it's second in the parsha, is because of the fact that we had just finished learning the Dharm because of Parakamad and Ksubis, and so now we wanted to bring in another type of neder, which is the neder of Nazir. And so we end up in a kind of awkward thing, which is, even though the smichus of the parsha is that it comes before Nazir, and that's the reason they have a real deep connection, that's how it got into the Seder of Nashim, nevertheless, it comes afterwards in the Seder of the Mishnayos. That is part one here of the Gemara. Is that the Gemara? 2 dots. Yeah, so what does the Gemara say? Hamakane the Eved en lechatchila light. Mashma from the Mishnah, that the Mishnah says Hamakane, those that are going to do kinoi on their wife, those that are going to warn their wife against being close to someone else. So the lashon of the Hamakane is Mashma, it's b'di'eved. But lechatchila is not to be done. We're going to see this on Daf Gimel in 2 days. We'll get more into this. But Hamakane, at this stage of the Mishnah, is mashma. It's only with the Eved, not lechatchila. Says the Gemara, Kosover Tana Didan. It's mashma that our Tana holds also lekanis, that it's forbidden. Really, you're not supposed to do kinoi, as Rashi explained. Right? What's the reason that you would say that you shouldn't be, really doing kinoi? Rashi says, "Shemevi atzmalatate Hagar." It's going to bring into fights. Best ishtel den evil, and it's going to be causing her to be, made very disgusting. But I feel hitahiri, even if she's totally tar and there's nothing here. So we're going to end up seeing more about this. If it's a aser, it's a mitzvah, all the different opinions on Daf Gimel. But for the moment, Hamakane the Eved en lechatchila. What does it mean? It means that we're darshaning from the Lashon HaMishnah, from the Hay, as Tes is going to point out. It could have said Mekane Adam Leishtai, right? Didn't. It said Hamekane, right? The one that decided to do Kinoi. The Mashmayas says the Gemara of the Mishnah, is that is a Bidi Eved, and it is not a Lechatchila. So therefore, this Tan of our Mishnah is Mashmer Blaz, seems to be holding that really it's not a Lechatchila thing to be Mekane your wife. Just note that we're saying this on the opinion of Rabbi Lezer. Would Rabbi Shua agree or disagree at this stage? Right? If you remember the beginning of Tainus, we talked about the fact that the first part of a line of the Mishnah, in an opinion, it was also Rabbi Lezer over there. Rabbi Lezer didn't necessarily have to hold. We had also a similar thing in Brachas. The first opinion that was mentioned says, "When's the time of Kriyat Shema?" And so we mentioned that when you have an opinion could be in a variety of parts. Not necessarily is the Tana Kama who's being mentioned first holding of all of those parts himself or alone. So it's Hamakana Leishta, which is literally 2 words. It's not a very long shita. It's much shorter than when we had in Tainus and in Brachas. If you look at Rashi, you'll see that L'chadchila loy midloy tani Rabbi Lezer. It's mashma. This is Rabbi Lezer's opinion. Hamakana Leishta. We're not saying anything necessarily about Rabbi Shua at the moment. We're just saying that it's mashma from the Tanakama when he's saying Hamakana Leishta, that he was not just saying it's Mekanala Pishna Mashka Piarecha, but he's also saying that there's a certain level of B'di'evet here. That really the Chatchila, this is not to be done unless, of course, I guess it had met some sort of clear evidence already. Okay, so let's see Taisus for a moment. Taisus over here says Hamakana de Evet and L'Chatchila Loi. Says Taisus V'im Taimer V'chi Kol Hecha de Tani Hey B'Tchilas and Lashon de Evedu. Are you telling me that every single place in Shas, every time it says a hey in the beginning of a word, right? You can say it's B'Di'evet? Of course not, right? If you look in the second parak, right? The Ha'ish Mekadesh. Yeah, the action of this b'di'evet. Tyson gives here numerous examples, right? It says ha'haylech lishchet as pischai. Right? Is that b'di'evet? Someone's going to check this car in Pesach, right? But yet we know that there are times that the Gemara does darshan it, right? If ha'sheichet is ha'misukenes, and that's supposed to be ideally not. So there are times where you see that the hay is darshaned to say, oh, it's b'di'evet, and there are times that it's totally ignored. So what's the logic behind it? So if you look at skip the rest of the citations of Taisus via Shleimar, it says Taisus, the chol heicha the ikal emitli b'lishna daik haki. You're going hacha. There's Taisus, look, if they had something to say, they could be able to darshan it, then they do it. You can't always find something, and so therefore they won't always do it. In this case, since it was so obvious, you could have said mekana lish, and you wouldn't have lost anything. The fact that it said ham mekana, maybe that is an indication of the fact that it is actually not ideal. It's a bit of it. Now, one of the things to always marvel at is mamish on the treasure that every word of Chazal, not every word, even every letter, even an extra letter. We're not here talking about the Chumash. We're talking about darshaning the lashon of the Mishnah, the lashon of the Mishnah of Rebbe. One letter. We're going to spend here a whole thesis on taking it apart and seeing if it was l'chatchila or b'di'evet. Yeah. So the more at this stage, and I should also note that if you look at the Taisa Shantz, we'll do our first Taisa Shantz. So Taisa Shantz says it's about, I guess, I don't know if everyone has it or if you could read it, and it's about halfway down in Taisa Shantz. After the Gemara, it says V'tema deha ika harbe mekaymes deloy parach hihacha. You're going hamevi gela ishtay v'chein asheleach dehave afilu l'chatchila. Those situations. Right, they could be even l'chatchila. So, what do you mean to say it's b'di'evet? You don't always say it's b'di'evet. Sometimes l'chatchila. Right, Ted says you don't always darshan it that it's b'di'evet just because you have a hay. The Ted sounds even stronger. Sometimes l'chatchila. Sometimes it's a mitzvah to divorce your wife. So, what do you mean to say that it's a b'di'evet over here? How would you know? So it says Tais v'shan v'yesh lamed le'parchle ela hechad equal mite the havel lashon di'evet. One possible answer says the Tais Shan says maybe there's only going to be discussed in situations where maybe you would think it's a b'di'evet, and that's why the Gemara wants to discuss it. Or maybe the Gemara only, the Mishnah only is darshan in this manner, where there was some sort of a teretz, something to actually add to it. So Pesach Shans is saying that don't ask on the basis of the fact that we now spend a moment here saying, oh, but is this b'di'evet or chatchila? Maybe this Tana's mashma that really doesn't hold of doing kino, that it's really b'di'evet. Pesach is saying you can't action that in all cases. Where you have the ability to say something, where you see something, say something, is not always the case. Only when you have the actual ability to substantiate it, it could be that it will be used. It's not a tool that you'll find every single time utilized. Fine. So Zot the Gemara, I'm kind of David and the Mishnah is mashma that the Eved you really shouldn't be doing kinoi. I'm sorry, the you really shouldn't be doing kinoi, but the Eved it's okay. So it's mashma like Savatana done also the kamis. Fine. Amar Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak. When Rish Lakish would start giving a drasha on the Sotah, Amar Hachi, he would open up his drasha like this. I'm not sure it's exactly the similar to Gemara's in Megillah that say when XYZ would open up his drasha on Purim on Esther, he would open it like this. It may be in that genre, right? When he would open up the parsha of Sotah, when he would give his drasha about Sotah, he would always open up the following: Ein mezavgin. I always wonder about this. Like, the openings were the same. They used the same opening every time they gave it. Like every time it came Purim time, you look at the Mar Megillah, they would open it up like this. Mashma, they did it more than once. That was their opening. Everyone knew this was the opening. This is how they gave their speeches. They open up with this puzzle, with that puzzle. Repetition is sometimes good when you know the intro, you know where the person's gonna, let me off where they're starting out from. Yeah. So Rish Lakish, when he would open up Parsha Sotah, he opened it up like this. How did he do it? Ein mezavgin la'adam isha elo lefi ma'asav. He would open up the parsha by saying a person gets a shidduch according to his deeds, according to how much of a tzaddik or a rasha is the kind of a zivig that he gets. That's how he opened up this treatment of Maseches Sotah. Shneimar, because the pasuk says, "Kol yanuach shevet harasha al ger al tzadikim," because the rod of the wicked is not going to rest in the lot of the tzaddikim. In other words, the bad person is not going to be mizdabeg with the good one. Yeah. So again, Rish Lakish opens up for the parsha of Sotah. He gives you this zog. What's the reason that he's opening up with this in parsha Sotah and he's giving his drash on Sotah? He's letting you know you had a bad wife. Look in your own meisim. You're probably not such a good guy. If you have a wife that's not acting with derech tovim, look at yourself. There's probably something to see here before you go harping on her. Yeah. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yechanan. So this is seemingly separate statement from Rabbi Yechanan. The kosher lezavkan kriyas yamsov, and it's very hard to be mizdavek a man and a woman. This is like the basics of all shav brachas Torah. Very hard to put together a husband and a wife, just like kriyas yamsov. Shneimar, because like it says in pasuk, Elokim Moshiv Yichidim Beisa. Hashem puts together lonely single people in one home. He takes out the captured. He takes out the ones who were enslaved. B'kosharis is mashma like in a shatz akosher, in an appropriate time. As Rashi says, let's look at these Rashis. That what does it mean? What did Hashem do? If we look at Rashi. So let's look at Rashi starts that when Rish Lakish opened the parsha, when you come to Darshan parsha Sotah, his name is Avgin Tzinu Latzadik, Prutza Rasha, Tzinu to a Tzadik, and a Prutza to a Rasha. We darshan from the pasuk Lo Yanuach Shevet Rasha Ger Tzadikim. Right, the rod of the wicked is not going to go to the girl of the Tzadikim. Lo Yizdavik Memshelas Rasha Beger Tzadik. Right, the Memshala of a Rasha, the kingdom of Arash is not going to go into the lot of the tzaddik. And it is hard, as it were, to the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyachol, Lezavgam, to set them up, Hanach Lefi Maisav, right, to set up people according to their deeds, Kriyas Yamsov. It's like as hard as Kriyas Yamsov. Shenistanu Sidrei Bereshis, where the Seder of Bereshis was changed. Just to note over here, we had the Mishnah tells us in Avos in Parak Hey, the Mishnah tells us that there are Asar Nisim that happened on Shabbos ben Hashmashas. So over there, the Rambam writes that it wasn't just Asar Nisim, all Nisim, most Nisim were not created after after Sheish Mei Bereshis, but rather at that time. In other words, says the Rambam on day 2. When it was time to split when it came time to splitting the waters on high and the waters below, says the Rambam, that was also the time that Hashem decided to split the Yamsuf and to split the Yarden. That all took place at that time. And it was all built into Sidrei Bereshis. Why? Says the Rambam, because we are very much unwilling to suggest that the Nistim come about at a later point, that Hashem is nishtana the Ratzon at a later point. The Ratzon takes place all at the time of creation itself. So at the time of creation itself, when Hashem was splitting the waters, He also split the waters of the Yamsuf and the Yarden. This is the opinion of the Rambam. Why does the Rambam say that? Because it says that Chazal did not want to say that miracles take place, that Hashem is mishtan in the Sidrei Teva. Fine, be it as it may. If we understand this Gemara in a literal sense, and everybody asks, all the Mefarshim ask, what do you mean? V'koshin l'zavgan kikriyas Yamsuf, and Rashi is saying v'koshin l'fnei ha'makim. It's hard to God. What do you mean it's hard to God? We just finished the Gemara in Tainus Chaf Hey, where we talked about Mendaisa and his daughter, right? Where they had no oil for the Shabbos candles. And what did he say? When she was crying, he said, look, the same way that the oil lights, the vinegar lights. What's the difference? We just so used to nature. So what do you mean it's kosher for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Nothing's hard for the Rebbeinu Shalom. The answer has to be mitzidenu. It's not mitzidai. It's only with regards to us. We see Teva as being normative, and anything that will be outside the Seder Teva as being challenging. So therefore, what we're saying is that from our perspective, the waters do not split, and therefore, if something like that happens, that is quite difficult, but not from HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective. And the clear proof to this is, again, from that Gemara there in Tainus, the Gemara over there said, if you remember, she had a dream, the wife of Pnei Daisa, right, that they were so poor, right, and so she was very much sad about it, that she got a golden leg, and then she davened that she should be returned, and because she had a dream where she saw that she was in heaven, and only had a table of the 2 golden legs and not the 3, everyone else had 3. So they threw it back up, and the heaven, takes the golden leg. So what do you mean it takes the golden leg? So the Gemara over there said it's kasha nesa achar minesa rishon. What do you mean it's kasha nesa achar? Because giving is one level of hardness, but taking, that's even a harder level. Again, what do we mean? It means not mitzad the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's mitzad us. We see one as being harder or easier, but the truth is, in reality, that if we really had an appreciation of nature, if we really had an appreciation of what the Rebbeinu Shalom is doing in this world, we will be shocked every second. The fact that we're able to move our hands up, down, sitting, all the things that we take for granted is just as much unbelievable nisim, because nature itself is not to be taken for granted. Yeah. So, again, according to, so the Gemara said that Rabbi Shlokish says that a person gets a shidduch lifi maisav, and then Rabbi Yochanan says that it's hard to set them up, like Kriyas Yamsov. And let's just finish the Rashis. So Rashi says, Moshe Chin Beitza, Adam Yochanan v'Isha Yechida, 2 single people, V'umazavgam Yacham, Hashem brings them together, Miyashir ben Bais, he puts them in a house. What does it mean? He takes out the capture and puts them in a time of kosher. He takes them out in the right time. He took them out in the right time. Right? Not to call. That's the famous Rashbam, the end of Parshas Emor, where the Rashbam says that's why we do Sukkot not in Pesach time. Why? Because that's Shas HaKosher. That's a beautiful time. Go out. It's the spring. You sit in a tent. Perfect. No, you go in a time when it's going to already be cooler and it's already going to be not exactly the best of weather. That's more of a challenge. But to do it in June time, whatever. Pesach is like an April, May time. You're going to do it in June. It's going to be really nice. So that would be, then people would say, we're doing it because it's such a nice time, a nice experience. So to make sure, again, we're not saying in the winter, but although in certain places in the world it is, but certainly the entire Eretz Yisrael already getting to the fall is already not as hot, not as comfortable, and so therefore that's why that's the more appropriate time to go out. Continues the Rashis. So Rashi says, Aini, is this really true? Oh, so we have to do the Gemara now. So the Gemara says like this: Aini, fact the Gemara, is this true that a person is going to only marry another person as a result of their maisim, and that it's really hard to make these kind of shidduchim like Kriyas Yamsuf? Is this true? The Amrav Yudah Amarav Abram Kansias of Baskal Yotis Vamers Baskal and Plenty Base Plenty Plenty Sotah Plenty. Don't we know that 40 days before the Yitzira of Vlad, 40 days before somebody is formed, that a Baskal goes out and says that the daughter of X is going to marry Y. The daughter of X is going to marry Y. What does that mean? That means that that heaven is, as it were, deciding who's marrying whom. So what do you mean it's so hard? It's already been decided. What do you mean that it's Lefi Maisa? It's already been decided. On that, right? It's not just that and who's going to be married, but also who gets whose homes, who gets whose fields. All that's already decided. Answers the Gemara, like Kasha, Zig Rishon, Zig Sheni. It's the difference between Zivik Rishon and Zivik Sheni. What do we mean? So by Zivik Rishon, when somebody's getting married for the first time, so then that's going to go Lefi Mazel. So a Ratzadik can marry a Russia, right? It's going according to the Baskel. Right? The Baskel says X is going to marry the daughter of Y. So if X is living a dissolute life, this is Abraham Yam Kerman Vlad. And let's say they get married at 20. There's a lot of years for the person for X to do a lot of things that are not appropriate. Or Y, or Y's daughter. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. But it's Lafi Mazel, so they can end up being put together, even though they are not necessarily appropriate for each other in terms of how they're actually living their lives. But that's what the Mazel said back at the beginning before they were born. Or by Zivik Sheni, that's going to be Kashik Kriyas Yamsov. By Zivik Sheni, that's going to be Lefi Maisav. And that's going to be very hard, as it were, to take people who have lived lives and they have, as it were, have a lot of ups and downs, hills and valleys, there to be taking somebody with all of the peccadillos and be mazdaving them with somebody else with all of their peccadillos, that's quite difficult. Anybody who's tried to set up singles, it's one thing in the 20s, another thing in the 30s, and the 40s, it is, gets more and more progressively difficult. Yeah. So Rashi says, we have a couple of Rashis with Taisus we have to jump on here. So just quickly, Rashi says, the Im Taima, what do you mean? We have said that everything is going to go according to the schus of a person, according to the ma'asim of a person, and we're asking now, but how is that true that you're going to have now? Rabbi Yehuda says that Abraham Yom Kaim Tziyas Avlad Baskal Zyetzis Rameres Bas Pleni Lepleni. What do we mean? Says Rashi. Any me have a zivig lefi Rasha's chus. You're saying that the zivig of a person depends on the rishus or the schus of a person, but you're literally saying that Abraham Yom Kaim Tziyas Avlad Baskal Zyetzis, and it's saying it doesn't make a difference about the kind of actions of the person. Heaven's decided who's going to marry whom. So Freg Rashi, 1 second. You're telling me that we have a Gemara Nida. The Gemara Nida tells us that everything is determined by heaven, a whole life. But one thing is not determined. There's a Malach al you give him a tipa, he brings it in front of the Malach who's Mamun al brings a tipa in front of the Rebbeinu Shalom and says, Tipa zu matela. What's it going to be? Gibor chalash. Chachamay tipesh. Ashrayani. Avot tzaddik v'rosh loy ka'amar le'de'ein zed b'dinei shemayim. That's not lefi shemayim. Heaven doesn't decide that. So in other words, when we saying that a person is going to be mizdavig loy la'adam le'ish lefi maisav, when we're saying that a person is to set them up is mamish hard, that's talking about bezivik sheni. That's talking about a situation where it's not going based upon the mazel of what happens. It's just talking about after somebody was already, as the Teish Shantz, let's talk about the Teish Shantz here. Teish Shantz points out that what he means Zivik Sheni is an Alman la Almana. It's about halfway, almost to the bottom of the wide lines. He says that's like the Alman to an Almana, a widow to a widower, or somebody who's been married before. But he says, what about a bacher? Avol bacher shenas almana. But if you have a single person who has not been married and before, but he's marrying an almana, so then a ibcha, right? Or you have a almain who is marrying a besula, that's not going to be considered zivig rishon, right? He wants to say that as long as one part of the couple has not been married before, that's still considered zivig rishon. That zivig rishon is not both couples being married for the first time. But as long as one of them is married for the first time, that's still going to be considered zivig rishon. It's only if both of them are being married for the second time that's going to be considered zivig sheni. But what we're seeing from this Gemara now, and this to me is like a fundamental challenge. A lot of people ask this: is what do you mean? It says it's clear from the Gemara that the first marriage is based upon bashert status. The first marriage is based upon Abraham Yom Kaim Tziyas Avlad. We're not saying a person is getting married in the female, so that's only Zivik Sheni. And we're saying from the Teish Shantz, that means that it has to be that that both couples were married before. If only one of them was married before, that's still considered ziv rishon. And ziv rishon, what are we saying? Ziv rishon is lefi mazel. Ziv sheni is lefi ma'asav. Ziv sheni is kasher kriyas yamsav. Ziv rishon is easy. Ziv rishon is basher. It's all Abraham Kerem Tziras Avad. So the classic answer, right? When people say, "Oh, but I have not felt it," there's a certain. The truth is, it's possible to lose zivig rishon even if a person's not been married before. Well, it's true. The third Shatz is saying that the way he wants to learn the Gemara is that so long as one part of the couple has not been married before, it's still considered zivig rishon. But who's to say that you can't lose it? Who's to say that it's not possible that it could be lost? It's true that there is some sort of basko, but who says that it cannot be lost with the myself of a person? That's number one. And that's why people shouldn't be bothered by the idea. Well, and second, I need a basher. I haven't found it. What? Don't worry about so much of a basher. You know when you know if you married a basher? At the end of 120. And it's possible that you could have a wonderful marriage with somebody who was not your basher. 100% possible. In the same way that it's possible that a person who marries the bashar could get divorced within 6 months and be like, what? But it's a bashar. There's no guarantees of it. Yeah, there's no guarantee here that just because the Basko that says Abraham Karen says the Basko is Yaitses doesn't mean that that's who you actually marry. You have choices. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the right or the wrong. It's the mice of what happens in a marriage that's going to actually determine that. All right, just two more things before we have to stop. Number one is what does it mean when we say it's kashik kriyas yamsuf? So the Teres Shans brings down a Rabbeinu Tam, a very cute Rabbeinu Tam. What do you mean it's kashik kriyas yamsuf? Says Rabbeinu Tam. Says the Teres Shans bring down Rabbeinu Tam that the suggestion is that you know what happened in kriyas yamsuf as Hashem broke down these people from the Jewish people. He took away the Egyptian overseers, the Egyptian overlords from the Jews. Shetavak, the first of the wide lines of my Gemara. Shetavak Kodesh Baruch Mitzrayim Bayam. Hashem drowned in Mitzrayim in the water. To save the Jews. It's like he killed somebody's husband and somebody's wife in order to make the remaining couple to be able to get together. That is why it's like Kriyas Yamsuf, right? In that sense, that it's kosher Kriyas Yamsuf because over there Hashem took the Egyptians away from the Jews. So it's kosher Kriyas Yamsuf. Hashem is taking away sometimes this couple from this one from that one in order to be able to bring the next ones together. As we say, that is in fact the Zivik Sheni, right? Because kosher Kriyas Yamsuf is only going to be applicable by Zivik Sheni. That's how that works. Here we have Habazug Rishon, Habazug Sheni. So Tais asks the question. If you look at the Gemara, Tais doesn't explain this clearly, but I'm just telling you outside that if you look at my Katan Yud Ches, you will see that over there the Gemara says the exact same line. Over there, that Gemara says that Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel says over the same exact memra. And over there we have a halach of Shmuel. Shmuel says you're able to get engaged during Chol Hamoed. And what's the reason? Maybe somebody else is going to jump in. I never understood. Wait a minute, somebody's going to jump in and get married. How's somebody going to jump in? You're already dating. What kind of a world do they live in? I don't know. But Shmuel says, you're allowed to get engaged to Chalmai. Somebody's going to jump in and marry her. So Taisa asks, over there, the Gemara says, what do you mean, Shemi Kameno Acher? Don't you say, Abraham Yam Kerem Tziras Vlad? Doesn't Shmuel say that a Baskal is Yaitzi? So how can anybody end up marrying her? So over there, the Gemara answers, because maybe somebody davened really hard. And so davened really hard, they're going to get her outside of the mazel. So again, as I said, the mazel doesn't actually determine things fundamentally. You determine things fundamentally, or your davening does. Or somebody else's davening for you does, right? So over here, Taisus is asking, why didn't the Gemara just say that it was Zivik Sheni? That Shmuel was talking about a situation of Zivik Sheni. Obviously, the answer is, because when people are getting married for the second time, it's not Shemi Kameno Acher. No, I'm joking. But the situation of Shemi Kameno Acher is clearly to be applicable to even the first spouse is much more fundamental than to say limited to just Zivik Sheni. That's number one. Then the last Taisus says, Nira Rebbe, it's clear that Rebbe is saying that Abraham Kerem Tziras Havlan, Baskal Yotzes, for Emeres, etc., that it's Kaidim Tziras Zachar. It's before the Tzir of the male, right? That's how the line is. Because the line is Baskal Yotzes for Emeres, Bas Plenty La Plenty, right? So it's mashma that it's the male is the Iker here. Bain im Leonel the Nekev Adain, Bain im Nel, regardless of whether the girl has been born yet or not. So I want to point out that you see from here that it was not such a focus to have the girl be younger than the boy. We'll leave it at that. All right.